welcome back to another edition of 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse. Some really wild cinema, and today we're not only going to talk about 1977's Kingdom of the Spiders, we're going to discuss John Bud Cardos' legacy in the whole film grindhouse industry. Because this was one of those environmental thrillers where nature ran amok, and John was the director on this. I think Ego Canto was the producer. William Shatner was the star, along with Tiffany Bowling, Woody Strode, Whitey Hughes, and a bunch of other guys you would recognize. And they basically had over 7,000 live tarantulas there, and they tried, like John says, we tried to do our best to avoid killing them, but shit happened, and we'd even use the dead ones. We'd nail them to the doors and stuff. So it was basically nature runs amok. These spiders are overrunning the town. Shatner, they said, in a commentary, basically this is one time where his overacting really worked, and this wasn't when he was on hiatus from Star Trek. This was when Star Trek, the first season, was actually canceled, and Bill wasn't going back anywhere, had nowhere to go, so he was doing movies. And Blanca's sitting here being nice. You being a good girl? So anyway, the whole thing was a mix of thrills, chills, and a lot of stunts. And they had Whitey Hughes, who anybody who knows stuntmen would recognize that name because he did a lot of shit for Peckinpah. And there was something where basically they were shooting Whitey in a plane and Bud was flying the other plane. Bud was an everyman. He did everything. So they were doing that, and they also did a stunt where they had a water tower crash where basically they sawed the front legs of the water tower, and this car hit it at an angle. And the back legs weren't sawed because that way it would definitely fall on the angle they wanted and fall on top of a cop car. Well, Dick Clark saw that and wanted Bud to duplicate it on something else. I can't remember what it was, and he had gotten Whitey back, and they did the whole thing. So basically what happens in the film is people are killed and webbed over by spiders. The town is webbed over by spiders. They're doing everything to kill the spiders. And it sort of ends with the survivors, Shatner and a few other people, all trapped in this lodge that is now webbed in. And it just fades away with that. And that was actually a matte painting. So now we go back to Bud. And Bud was born in 1929 to a show business family. And Bud actually was one of the original Our Gang kids in the late 30s. He didn't stay there that long, but he was there. So Bud had a really eclectic, he was an everyman. He fucking did everything. He directed, he did stunts, he flew planes, he did the car stuff. A couple times he was called in at the last moment when a director was fired. One was Mutant, and the other one was The Dark, where he had to replace Tobe Hooper. So Bud was all over the place, and he set up a lot of stunts. He did the fire gag in Nightmare in Wax with Cameron Mitchell, and it was interesting because through Gary Kent, I met Bud, but never met him in person. We talked on the phone, and I met a lot of the other Satan Sadist guys, like Bob Dix. I had talked to him on the phone too. Actually, Bob Dix had helped Bud write his autobiography, Action, which is only, unsadly, 125 pages, and it's pretty good. But I talked to Bud after that, and I had Bud on my radio show a couple times. Him and Gary and a few other people just sitting around for an hour shooting the breeze about movies and stuff. And a few things he had said during those times never made it in the book, like the fact that he basically kicked the shit out of Tex Watson for harassing the girls on a movie set. Run-ins with Charles Manson at the Span Ranch and things like that, somehow that didn't get into the book. But like I said, Bud had actually called me up the night he found out that Bob Dix had passed away. So I was sort of like, an unofficial member of this whole little crew here, because we used to talk all the time. And Gary I saw when he came out here to Wasteland and stuff. But Bud just did just about everything, and he was also a second unit director on the Wild Bunch of all films. So even up until I had talked to him, he passed away. It'll be December 31st. next week. No, actually this week, December 31st, what am I saying? So he was 91 years old. I had spoken to him. He was still, when I called him up one time, he called me up and he goes, I got a movie you might want. It was this movie he directed that never got a VHS release or a DVD release called Soul Soldier. And he had found a 35 millimeter print and wanted to know if I wanted it. I said, sure, but then he said, dude, I opened the can and it just reeked of vinegar. It wouldn't be worth sending down to you. But in the interim, he was putting a trailer in his cabin out in the desert, or trailer out in the desert, putting the window in it. So, you know, at 80-something, 89 years old, he was still doing this hard work. And then, you know, him and Gary and Chuck Bale and Bob Ivy were doing stuntman appearances, and that was sort of offered to a promoter up here. Because Gary said, how would you like to have Bud and Chuck Bale and Bob Ivy and a couple of these other guys? And I said, well, I'd love it. I said, but, you know, you got to talk to the promoter. And Gary did and was poo-pooed off for some reason, which I thought was fucking stupid, because who wouldn't want to meet all these guys? But sadly, none of them are around anymore. And, you know, I treasure the conversations that I had with Bud. I treasure the friendship that I had with all of these guys. And it's just sad that, you know, you talk about missed opportunities with these conventions, that these fucking promoters just didn't think highly enough of these guys to bring them in and, like, educate the fans on, you know, how to make B movies, and working with Al Adamson and Sam Sherman and people like that, and Sam Peckinpah. I don't get it, but, you know, I will say one thing. At every conversation I ever had with any of these guys, I walked away learning something. And that's what, you know, I share this stuff because I think, you know, a lot of guys out there want to know how this shit worked back in the day. And, you know, like I said, Bud did a lot of stuff for Al Adamson, and of course Bud had a plane, Bud had this, Bud had that, and, you know, Al could make use of it all, so it all worked out. So, like I said, these guys did some great stuff, and, you know, Bud was all over the road, from B pictures to A pictures like the Wild Bunch. It was also one of our last conversations. He said, yeah, I got to fly down to South Africa for a couple of months. They want me to shoot second unit on this movie. So Bud never actually retired. So that's our show for today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the flip side.